Originally, I was going to open up this video by explaining my history with the character of Spider-Man, but it's a pretty familiar story. I first fell in love with Andrew Garfield's version of the character before Tom Holland joined the MCU, and I found new meaning in my love of the character. I dove into the comics. I obsessed over his portrayals in video games. I bought t-shirts. I became a super fan of the webhead, as they say. Tale as old as time. We're here to talk about Spider-Man today, but we're also here to talk about loneliness, particularly in relation to the newest Spider-Man film, Spider-Man Brand New Day. Going into this film, I had unreasonable expectations, especially because I had to wait a few days after release to actually go see it. I was reading all these positive reviews, taking in all the information I could, reading some minor spoilers, and sort of putting my feelers out for the vibe of the film. And this is when my expectations only tripled. This sounded like exactly the kind of Spider-Man story I wanted, nay, needed at this point in my life, and maybe always. It sounded like the perfect superhero film. It sounded like exactly the kind of movie that makes me want to make movies. And then, it was all of that and then some. Everything about this movie was distinctly Lily-coded, beyond just being like an objectively great film. The foundation of what makes it great is found within all the things people are talking about. The direction, the action scenes, the love it has for the comic book character, Tom Holland's portrayal of Peter Parker, its themes of grief and loneliness and growing up, a proper introduction to Peter's rogues gallery. Now's a good time to mention there's going to be spoilers in this video. I'm giving you a second. The proper introduction to mutants in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Some Punisher fun, some Hulk fun, a reminder of what made the Marvel Cinematic Universe and superhero stories in general so culturally gripping. It is all of those things, but it's also so personal to me. And it's so personal to so many, I can already tell. This is not a unique experience. People love this movie, and for good reason. I think this is going to be one of my favorite superhero films for the rest of my life. It is going to be hard to top this, in all honesty. It's easily my favorite Spider-Man film of all time. Unless you factor in the Spider-Verse films, then it gets a little more complicated, but I kind of almost want to give it the edge, just for personal reasons. That being said, the animation of Spider-Verse really propels it to another level, but like, narratively and like, for me personally, I think Brand New Day has my heart a little bit more, but it's really hard to compare things that are so masterful. The way that I've seen people unite around this film is super humbling in an era where the culture seems to be endlessly divided. And I'm not here to imply that film can truly heal the things that are deeply wrong with society, or that this is like a coming together moment that is like, I'm not trying to put this on a pedestal and talk about it as though it is like the solution to everything going on, because it is far from that. Spider-Man, far from that. Thank you. Be here all week. But cultural moments where people are able to unite, even over something trivial like this, matter. This is the concept of myth. This is why the culture gravitates towards superheroes. It's because the culture gravitates towards myth itself. This is seen also in Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey, which I don't have much to say about. Like, I loved it to death. I wanted to make a video on it, but I just did not have enough like interesting thoughts. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about it here, basically in relation to superhero films, because I know a lot of people want to pit these things against each other, when at the end of the day, they're both blockbusters and they're both explorations of characters that have existed in myth for a long time. Obviously, Odysseus has existed a little bit longer than Spider-Man, but when you really look at it on a granular level, they're the same thing. Not the same type of character, but their roles in culture and storytelling, their evolution over time, and the importance of characters that cultures can come to understand and hold in high regard. When you let characters grow and evolve on screen or on the page or in any fictional context, and the culture learns the ins and outs of those characters and is able to easily adapt them into new situations and create their own stories with them, it is thematically rich in a way that I don't think people give this genre of storytelling enough credit for. You see it especially within comic books themselves, where there are tens of hundreds of different iterations of characters, and they're able to go in all these new and unique, exciting directions. They're all still grounded in what makes that character. Even if every author and artist that pins that character is going to have their own unique take on it. Like, that's the beauty of it. That's why we need stories like this. The closest thing to the Brand New Day hype that I've seen in recent times was with last year's Superman. Okay, so yeah, the I'm a punk rocker trend was cheesy as all hell, but it was also kind of beautiful. Maybe a lot of those people aren't living by the virtues that they describe in that trend. Maybe not all of those people who claim to be punk rock are actually punk rock, because punk rock is a little bit more than kindness, let's face it. But it's still nice to see a story be that popular and inspire that much hope in the hearts of the culture. Again, not with the expectation that it's going to fully change or revolutionize us, because no mainstream movie is going to do that. By nature of being mainstream, the truly revolutionary films are the ones that are inherently niche, because in order to be revolutionary, you have to go against the grain of the culture. And so nothing that's going to be huge is ever going to be revolutionary. But important films can still exist within the context of the mainstream. And things like last year's Superman and Brand New Day, and I would argue also The Odyssey, that take on these characters that have a huge mythos and revolutionize them, modernize them, give us a new take on them in the cultural context of today. I know a lot of people complain so much about The Odyssey and its portrayal of historical time and facts and costumes and stuff, but that's bullshit, respectfully. First of all, yes, The Odyssey takes place within the historical context of its time, but it's also an exploration of the fantastical belief systems of the time, of gods and monsters. And the people who consider adaptations only good when they are completely faithful to the source material are so uninspired and cannot call themselves storytellers or people who understand stories. Adaptations are at their best when they're doing something new, when they're giving us a new way to look at the source material, when they're taking this pre-established knowledge we have and using that to the benefit of both stories. This is why Moana 2026 is the worst film I've seen in my life, and I say that with no hyperbole. But even just mentioning it is talking about it too much, so. Okay, but Spider-Man, right? What is the character of Spider-Man? What has he always been? And what is he, especially now, to modern audiences? Brand New Day is chiefly about loneliness, a feeling of self-isolation, of grappling with grief, of losing people, of growing up, of the changing tides, and using that grief to isolate within oneself. And it's about the rebirth that happens when you let yourself isolate that way. That's an interesting part of the film that I don't see enough people talking about. Yes, the moral of the story is that Peter has to get out of his attic sometimes and not just hide behind the mask. He has to let Peter Parker exist rather than being Spider-Man 24/7. But his evolution in the more literal biological sense, this molting where his powers expand, he gets organic webs, enhanced strength, and spider senses. This is triggered by the extreme emotion that only exists because of his isolation and his slow descent back into being Peter Parker. It happens as a direct result of him seeing that MJ has moved on, and therefore as a direct result of his isolation. Sometimes you have to zero in on yourself. You have to consider your context rather than always being around people. But it is a very, very, very slippery slope. And as the film makes evident, we need other people. I used to consider myself an introvert. I don't really anymore. Now, part of that is honestly due to the fact that I never really made peace with the term introvert. It always felt like the wrong option to me. I loved people too much. I wanted to be the kind of people person that extroverts are. And in most ways I am. I do truly believe I'm split like 50-50 down the middle. Maybe 51% extrovert, I don't know. Despite my inclination towards isolating and deconstructing my own psyche rather than involving myself in frequent social interactions, I never wanted to be this way. I wanted to surround myself with people at all times. I needed it. And I think I would argue that we all do. Peter creates this situation for himself. He made the deliberate choice to push his friends away. Yes, he did it to save the world, but it was also a rather selfish choice. Well-intentioned, but a little selfish. After losing May in No Way Home, Peter refused to risk that again, and in the process, just lost MJ and Ned for a couple years. Having them be an active part of his life was always going to be the better long-term decision. I honestly think Brand New Day makes a thematic case for the fact that Peter's decision at the end of No Way Home might have been the wrong decision. It seems very heroic on paper, but it might have just been a grief-stricken boy's attempt at making the grown-up decision, and in doing so cost him a great deal of his peace as he began his adulthood. While Peter's struggle is the focal point of the film, there's a different character that makes this film what it is to me personally, and that is the character of Jean Grey. There has been a lot of discourse on this character. It's been one of the main talking points about the film, and a lot of people's least favorite element of it. For one, I see people complaining about the fact that we're getting an X-Men hero introduced in this film as an antagonist, which not only sets up this important mutant hero as a villainous character, but erases the potential to have a proper Spider-Man villain in the spotlight. But that has the same energy as complaining about adaptations for not being entirely faithful. And also, I do think this is incredibly faithful to the character of Jean, and I think the benefits of having her introduced in this film as the antagonist way outweigh the cons of missing out on another Spider-Man villain. We've gotten so many cinematic Spider-Man villains, and we're going to continue to get cinematic Spider-Man villains. I can think of no character in Peter's Rogues Gallery that would have made the themes of this film work as well as Jean did. So I totally think that was one of the best creative decisions made in regards to the film. And I love Jean to death, and the discourse around her and the lack of empathy for her are so interesting and illuminate a lot of things about this culture that I don't like to deconstruct, but we're gonna deconstruct here. The main argument is that Jean is irredeemable. She holds New York City mentally hostage for a couple hours, and before that, unconsensually uses the bodies of a bunch of civilians to enact her plans. She gets a few people shot, a few people seriously injured, and potentially one old man killed. This makes her irredeemable, no matter how dark her backstory is, according to some people, especially if we're now expected to go on and root for her in future Marvel Cinematic Universe X-Men films. Now, there's a lot of rebuttals to this. You could go the misogyny route and say, well, you would feel a little differently if this was a male character. I think that's honestly one of the weakest arguments here. I do think that probably influences some people in this decision more than they even realize, but I do think we'd hear people complaining about this generally, no matter what kind of character it was. If, for example, it was like Cyclops. That makes no sense in this situation. I'm just trying to pick a similar level of character. Not power-wise, obviously, but you know what I mean. It is interesting, though, how many MCU characters have also done terrible things and get the same level of flack. And I do have to note that the women do always get picked on more for it. For example, the easiest comparison to draw between Jean Grey and another MCU character is Wanda, who holds an entire town captive for a considerable amount of time, also because of her deep trauma. I'm a Wanda apologist. I mean, what she did with Westview is incorrect, but if you're actually like paying attention to the story and leading with empathy, as I think all people should when they are consuming media, but there are a lot of factors, but especially in fictional contexts. And I really enjoy stories that challenge the audience to do that. But then again, the Marvel Cinematic Universe started with a war criminal that people love and adore and believe earned his redemption. Now, within the context of Jean's story, we are at about the moment in Iron Man 1 where Tony realizes he's done things wrong and begins to make some changes, so like the end of Act 1. This movie was not meant to redeem Jean. It was meant to introduce her, her pain, and set her on the path to redemption, which we will see likely in 2028's X-Men. But I think they purposefully held back on making her too evil. I know it seems very evil at some points, and most people just can't get over walking the old man into traffic, and honestly, that's fair. I do feel like that shouldn't have happened. That feels like a little bit of a stretch. Anyway, she's still deserving of empathy. She's still an incredible character, and you're removing the context that she exists within. You're removing her identity as a mutant, her oppression, and the oppressed don't often get that level of empathy. And that's what I think this really has to do with. One of my favorite parts about Brand New Day is the way it introduces its mutant characters, that being Jean and her sister Sarah. Immediately, when we got the flashback with Sarah, I realized that the Marvel Cinematic Universe knows what it's doing with mutants, and I hope we keep up this thematic triumph when we get to X-Men in 2028. Mutants are the oppressed, within the context of the Marvel Universe, and also within the subtext. They represent the deviant, those who are oppressed due to their identity, whether racial, gender, sexual, religious, and otherwise. This is what makes the characters what they are, and it is why we are asked to have empathy for Jean. Not just because she lost her sister, but because she lost her sister, and her sister and her have been targeted all their lives and will continue to, because there's a burgeoning amount of mutant bigotry in the Marvel Universe. And it is really interesting to consider the fact that this mistake of Jean's and what damage Control has pushed her towards causing is going to be one of the first times within the MCU that the civilians of this universe are forced to question whether or not Jean's identity as a mutant led to this. And just like the real world, this fictional culture is afraid of nuance. It is very likely that they're going to take this at face value and say that Jean's inherent mutant nature is what caused her to do this heinous thing, rather than exploring the sociological elements that could have pushed her to this. Not removing the weight of what she did, but considering the cultural context that leads to a person doing that kind of thing. And it doesn't matter how few members of this oppressed group do these terrible things. Even just one is enough to tip the scale, and it is what we lovingly refer to as an optics nuke. I'm super interested to see how this is explored. But I already love the way that it is tackled within the context of Brand New Day. The line that Sarah says about her and Jean's mother and the fact that if she abandoned them because of their mutant nature, then she was never really a mother at all is so harrowing. And while I feel fortunate to have loving parents as a trans person, I've lost family members, certainly on an emotional level. I've been isolated, and I know so many people that have. It's part of the existence as an oppressed person, and I really thought it was portrayed beautifully. Within the Marvel Universe, those who are not mutants but have superpowers anyway, that is, get them via radioactive spider or gamma rays, are referred to as mutates. And while Peter Parker is a mutate, he's going to experience some of that oppression, but never the same level as a mutant. But there is intersectionality, and there are commonalities between these groups of people that are heavily misunderstood. Some people argue that when you're having these deep sociological conversations through the lens of something as silly as superhero stories, that you're removing the weight of the real world issues. And while I understand that perspective, it really dismisses the power of stories and the ability to prompt these conversations in people that wouldn't have them otherwise. It gives a very solid framework for understanding real world issues. And again, while maybe not the tipping point of a revolution, these are worthwhile stories that push the culture in a generally positive direction, that give people reasons to consider these things. And while I don't think many people are picking up on this deeply nuanced aspect of the film, they're mostly focused on the fun Spider-Man shenanigans and Peter and MJ and all that stuff, which is fair. All that is extraordinary. The very fact that it's there, the very fact that it's starting conversations with some people, and the direction it points the MCU in, make me think that this type of intellectually invigorating superhero film is going to start to become the norm again, due to how successful Brand New Day was. Thunderbolts is also an extraordinary example of this. A good superhero film that feels like a return to form, why we fell in love with these films in the first place, that is strengthened by its emotional core. Fantastic Four doesn't really have that same emotional core, but it's also a really great film, so I feel like that's in the conversation. I'm not too hopeful for Doomsday really at all. It seems to focus just on the superhero hijinks. I'll be there day one, I'll still love it, but it's not going to hit the same highs. Because the reason I love these stories is because of their human element. And again, their reflection of the broader culture. And to see this exploration of loneliness and oppression through this superhero lens is so fulfilling, so fun, and scratches all the right itches for me. For this being a Lily Eve video, I've neglected to talk very much about myself. So let's fix that. I'm so lonely. I have my family, I have my girlfriend, I have a lot of online friends that I love to death. I have literally no IRL friendships right now. I have familial relationships and I have my romantic relationship and I have online platonic relationships, but no one that I could physically be in the room with. I talk a little bit about this in my recent home video if you want to go watch that. Although that has more to do with the places I've been in my life. The places form the community, and I talk a lot about community in that video and what it feels like to lack that. But I, like Peter in Brand New Day, have felt isolated. I've spent so much time in the past few years figuring out who I am as a woman. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life doing that. That's what womanhood is. That's the beauty of it. But in doing that, I have isolated. Like I talked about earlier in the video, this is an important part of the process. You need to sometimes hyper-focus on yourself to figure yourself out and to figure out how you want to fit in with the world and who you want to be and all of that. But you also deeply need people and community and connection. In this season of my life, I just need to prioritize the relationships I already have, and also need to consider that online friendships are just as meaningful, even if the context is different and even if I feel like I want to feel physically close to people. Like, these are still relationships that are deeply important to me and who I am as a person. Brand New Day is about all the oppression stuff I was talking about, but beyond that, and in relation to that, it is about the choice to not do this alone, that we can't do this alone. Again, this isn't like a groundbreaking theme. It's not even the first time we've seen this sort of thing explored within a superhero story. It's kind of what Thunderbolts is about, but the particular way that it reaches this conclusion and nails home this theme is, I think, what makes it so beautiful. People make us who we are, and it sounds sappy, but stories make us who we are. I'm endlessly grateful for this kind of storytelling, even when it exists within a mainstream context. Now, I'm going to spend a lot more time talking about more niche independent films pretty soon, because that's where I found a lot of enjoyment in cinema as of late. That's where the true gems are. But I don't think we can completely discount these blockbuster movies, and specifically what they say about our culture at this moment. What does The Odyssey say about where we're at? What does Obsession and Backrooms succeeding, more so Obsession, but Backrooms there too, say about this moment we're in? And what Spider-Man Brand New Day says is that we are dealing with a generation of lonely kids, lonely teens, lonely young adults, lonely adults. It is so easy to feel alone in this world, especially given the technological revolutions we've been living through. The internet is a reminder of how many people there are, how many perspectives there are, how many things are happening at all times. And so when we see how big the world is, and yet our world feels so small, it makes it all hurt just that much more. And I think that's what this film speaks to. It speaks to the oppressed. It speaks to the way those in communities that are targeted by the government and society at large, how important community is for those people. My ridiculous expectations that I had for this film, while they were met, are now going to move on to the X-Men film, because if it does pull on this thread and takes the X-Men to their logical narrative point and explores the themes of oppression, as it should, as any good X-Men story should, then we're going to be in business. I really hope so. I think that's about it, but I just love superheroes, I love storytelling, and I love this culture and all its flaws, and I love exploring it and talking about it, and thank you for giving me a platform to do so. This video was a little shorter than my usual videos as of late. I've got a busy week ahead. We're dropping my sister off at college. I'm super emotional about it for so many reasons, but I have lots of things planned. The He-Man video I mentioned in the past, I don't think is actually gonna happen, but I have other really good plans, so just trust me, we'll get there when we get there. I'm going to see Jane Schoenbrun's new film this week, Teenage Sex and Death at Camp Miasma. I'm so excited for it. I once again have unreasonable expectations and already assume it's gonna be one of my favorite films of all time. But I know Jane has it in them because I saw the TV closed, currently in my top 4. I know, Fork Found in Kitchen, what can I say? I'm super, super excited. And I'm back into comics, so maybe I'll talk more about that. I don't know that I've really said all that I want to say about Brand New Day in this video, but it's certainly a good jumping off point. And I do want to talk more about Marvel and the Marvel Cinematic Universe specifically and this era it's in. So if you'd be interested in that, please let me know. Thank you guys so much for all the continued support on my recent videos. It means the world. I love to be doing this, and I hope to only keep doing it more. With all that being said, I'm Lily Eve. Thank you for watching. Thank you for spending your time with me. Sending you all so much love, and I'll see you in the next one.